Welcome everybody. Let me go ahead and get started. So for those who don't know me, I'm Falcon Napier. Welcome to Oracle of the Self group coaching. On today's call, what I'd like to do is share with you some of the results of the ChangeWorks profiles that many of you have completed. For those who haven't completed it yet, I'll certainly encourage you to do that, and we'll broadcast the link again by the time the call is over and done with. I also want to show you some of the individual responses that we've gotten, and I think I'm going to start there to illustrate a point, and then I'll get into the real meat of what those happen to be showing. So with that, let me go ahead and start the, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Here we go, just 1 second. Desktop number 2, share it. All right, so you guys should have a big purple world right now that you're looking at. What I want to do is show you the change grids of 3 respondents. Now, I've masked the names, and so these are all perfectly private. I'm showing them so that you can see what it is that we as ChangeWorks coaching professionals actually do. So now, this is the same activity list that 3 of you have filled out. I want you to just kind of notice the scatter patterns that you're looking at. So for this particular individual, not sure who this one was, but for this particular individual, you can see that across the entire activity set, all 12 of these activities, they rated their ability quite high, a 9 or higher, mostly 10s and 11s, nothing got a 12. They're also rating the level of challenge as being in a rather confined band between 5 and 8. There's one outlier, but you can kind of see that generally they're thinking about all of these activities in the exact same sort of way. Now, imagine if you were working with them one-on-one in a coaching relationship, what you might want to be working on. And many of you on the call right now are ChangeWorks coaches, and so you know what you would basically say. This is an individual who has a great deal of ability to do things, but the level of challenge is now moderate. So if you guys remember from last time around, we talked about the levels of tension. A lot of these activities are plotting in the lower half of power. So this wedge right here is power. And I'm just showing you guys the composite change grid. You know, I could switch out the backgrounds, but that would add a step for a point, and really just trying to make a simple point. But most of the activities are starting to plot down in power apathy. We have a lot of downgrid engagement the person is experiencing around these activities that are in this band of engagement rings.
And they say it's moderately important.
And you can see, you know, they've got, well, actually that's moderately sized. So most things,
moderately sized.
Red numbers, oh, I should make this bigger for all of you. The numbers are red, and so that tells me they consider them important. The color of the circle is how big of a task they think it is. So moderately sized for all of them. And activity number 5, whatever that is, I'd have to kind of scroll and look, but that one's kind of small and whatever. But they did agree that all of these were of sufficient importance that they qualified for a real, really high important thing. That's important to us to see because it tells us that we've crafted an activity list that resonates with that individual. And so, so that's this one. Now, for the exact same activity list, we have this individual who's plotting, and you can see their scatter pattern is very different. So a cluster of the activities are way up here in power stress. They're big and they're important. So if I, again, zoom in, if I zoom in, okay. Have I forgotten how to zoom in? Oh, make it stop, everybody. Oh, I don't know. I don't care anymore. So you can see that these particular activities are plotting up in power stress. Very important. That's why the numbers are red, and they're quite large. That's why the circles are red. They also have a cluster of activities that are plotting quite far outgrid. The more outgrid you plot, the more driven you are to do something about it. This is where the real tests in life are played out. You view your ability as being quite high, so 9 and 10 for these, but you also see the challenge as being 10, 11, even 1 is a 12. And so to go and perform these activities, this individual feels like There's a test afoot. There's a competition that might be happening. There's a little bit of a battle that might be going on that they're trying to work their way through. This individual also has a cluster of activities plotting a bit further downgrid. Now, it's not surprising to see that as activities plot further and further downgrid, we do see a greater incidence of importance going down and even size going down, which makes sense because if you consider your ability to be very high and the challenge to be very low, then when it comes to size, the resources that it's required for you to do whatever these activities are things you feel like you already have. They're already in place. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all for you to now perceive the size of that task as being a bit less because you've done it before, you've got the resources, whatever it happens to be. So size is smaller. Importance shouldn't change, even if it's downgrid. You would like to think that it might not be important in terms of me focusing on it right now, but the question is an independent question. How important is this task to you? So sometimes when we see activities plotting downgrid, importance continues to rate high. At the same time, what I said is true. As people's levels of tension go down, they start to diminish the importance around activities that truly are important for them to be paying attention to. So for example, let's say, for example, activity number one was something about someone's personal physical care, health care, or whatever. Well, if they're saying as that moves further and further downgrid, because I'm getting better and better at it, I can pay less and less attention to it. It's just not as important anymore. How many of us went like, yeah, but now you're talking about something related to health, and that's got to be something that's a bit more important. Yeah. So again, in our role as coaches, we might want to talk to this individual about the importance rating they attach to activity number one, because everything else is red, but that one activity is what it's all about. And I'll show you the activities later. That's not what's important right now. They also have activity number two, plotting very far ingrid. And so ingrid is over here towards the left. And so to plot over there, they have to think their ability is rather low. The 3 is, well, it's not terrible, but it's kind of still in the low end of the range. But they also perceive the challenge as being at the low end of the range. So how much ability do you really need to do something that isn't all that challenging? So they still feel like it's doable, but there's a very different perception. There's a very different, perhaps even belief or value that the individual is attaching with this particular activity. In our role as coaches, we would want to talk about, pretty much all the activities sooner or later, but these are 4 very different conversations. And that's what I really wanted to illustrate. If we go back to number 1, as we said, this is the oracle of the self. This is about you talking to you about you at the activity specific level. Well, when it comes to activities plotting so closely together, you can expect to find a certain harmony in the way that these voices are communicating and the messages that these voices are communicating. I'm not suggesting those messages are good, bad, right, or wrong. We have to look at the activity before we make the decision about, is this a good place for that? What I'm saying is that as far as this individual's perceptions of themselves around that particular activity, they seem to be more similar than they are different across the entire activity set. Where this individual is saying like, no, I feel very different about this cluster than I do about this cluster or this cluster or this cluster. And so our approach when we're doing coaching or whatever type of human development work we do has got to be a very different strategy and deployment for this individual than it does for this individual. And just to make things even more interesting, let's take a look at this particular individual. Let me zoom in on this one. Why wouldn't it do? Okay, I give up. In this particular case, the individual across the activity set has rated their ability as being moderately low. Look at that, kind of concentrating all around 3 for the ability level. And for some 5s, there's 1 they feel rather strongly about, relatively speaking. 7 is not a strong answer, but nevertheless, relatively speaking, they find themselves more able to do activity number 9 than these others. They consider them all to be important, hence the red numbers. But I noticed that none of these are particularly big. There's no red circles. So worst case scenario, they consider the activity to be of moderate size. Well, this is a very different kind of a grid to look at, because what we're seeing here is an individual who is basically saying to you as their human development professional, or again, the oracle of the self, this is what you are saying to you about you. You are saying, I don't have the level of knowledge, skill, or experience that I believe is necessary in order for me to handle these activities. And that would then move someone in the direction of training, really getting more knowledge, more skill, more experience, more content, really preparing themselves to handle these. Now, do they feel that they have time to do it? That's kind of a gifted student's question, but the answer is yeah. They're not been stressed about anything. Remember, this big wedge up here is stress. And again, anytime you want, we can look at it layer by layer, but you get the idea. They're not losing sleep over any of these activities. These things, yeah, they're up in power stress, but not very intensely. We haven't talked about the intensity rings, but that's what these gray lines are. When we're looking at each of these levels of tension, not all points inside of that wedge are created equally. So the further you move away from coordinate 0, 0 from the origin, the more intense the level of tension becomes. And so when you are in stress, for example, if you're way up here, up grid, that's a very intense experience of stress. Where they're plotting, they're actually in power stress, and they really are only moderately intense around it. So this is kind of more about like, they see benefit to it. There's a curiosity around it. There's a puzzle that needs to be solved, but there's no real sense of urgency, and there's no tremendous level of drive to tackle this particular activity set. And so we would certainly work with this individual in a very different sort of way. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because I want to go back to showing you the activity grids. And when I show you the activity grids, I don't want you to think that we can treat the activity in one single way that's going to help everybody do that. I'll give you some whatever advice I can, but ultimately you need to, this is why you need to get really good at hearing your own truth, understanding what that truth is saying to you, and using that information to help you get greater clarity, make better decisions, take more appropriate actions, etc. So, ultimately, your grid is your grid. The last thing I will say is that you must remember that the ChangeGrid is not a personality test. It's not a value study. It's none of those traditional psychometric tools. The ChangeGrid is a snapshot of a psychological moment in time. All we did when you filled out that ChangeGrid is that you took a quick look at each one of these things, and the system captured that in a graphic way that you can then look at. I say that so that I can remind you that movement is always available to you. Don't believe for one moment that anybody is stuck in one area of the ChangeGrid, or that what you see in the plotting for these 12 activities would be the same if we looked at the 12,000 activities that are actually on this individual's real ChangeGrid in their head. Everything that you're doing in life is on your ChangeGrid somewhere. And so all day long, those activities, goals, tasks, issues, whatever, are constantly coming into your awareness if there's sufficient tension. So I'm trying not to give you guys too much, but the rule is that people pay attention to where they find their tension. And so the thing is, the things that put you more upgrid, relatively speaking, are the things that are going to command your attention. And the more important those things are to you, the far, far, far more likely you are to focus upon those sorts of things. So bottom line, everyone's an individual, and this is why we like doing individual readings, even when we're doing these relatively short kind of group coaching sessions. Obviously, we do a deep dive if we're looking at individual grids. All right, so let me shut up for a second and open this up to questions and comments. Do any of you have anything you'd like to contribute to what I've said there? Questions you might want to ask, anyone?
This is T. The only thing, I'm so glad that you said this is a moment in time. And even if somebody fills it out for somebody else.
Mhm.
That, I mean, you know, when you have a team of people filling it out for a supervisor or whatever,
Right.
it's still a moment in time, and sometimes they can lay on their own biases.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and that's an important thing, because we really don't do an expose of our own self and put aside our own biases. So
Right, right.
I think that's something that we need to always consider. And
I
we
think you're
ourselves,
absolutely right.
you know, we have our own biases too.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the grids I'm going to show you guys in a little while about inventorying, you know, whatever these beliefs and values, biases, logical fallacies, all those sorts of patterns that end up contributing to what is essentially us. And those are all going, we talk about perceptions. Well, in order for us to perceive any one thing, we have to kind of like, what I want to say, unperceive a lot of other stuff that's around. You know, you got to like turn off some of the let me say the stuff that's surrounding it to focus on what's going on. So even that effort is an exercise in bias being applied. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so what else did I want to say? It was based on what you were saying. Oh yeah, this idea about it being a snapshot of a psychological moment in time. Another way to look at it, which might be a little bit more likely to be remembered as life goes on, is that it's always concerned me, and for those of you that are ChangeWorks certified, it probably concerns you as well. When a client wants to keep their ChangeGrid or put it into an employee folder or something or another, it's kind of like, no. This is not like a test result that's telling you who this person is or what they're all about. This is just telling us how they happen to be perceiving themselves at the moment in time that they filled the ChangeGrid out. And then we work with people and they work with themselves. Stuff happens and they end up moving around on the ChangeGrid. Maybe they move just a little bit, maybe they move a whole lot. It really depends on what their amount of focus is on whatever those activities happens to be. So the more fun way to remember it is think of the ChangeGrid as being the equivalent as a piece of fruit in the market. It's only going to stay fresh for so long. And so if we're doing work with a client, when they're filling out a ChangeGrid, I would say to them, if we're going to meet to do the debrief tomorrow, then fill out the ChangeGrid today. Don't fill out the ChangeGrid a week or 2 weeks or a month in advance of something. That fruit's going to go bad. You want to really go like, no, I want to make sure that whatever coaching, guidance, counseling, whatever I'm doing for myself or with my peers or with a professional, I want to make sure that it's meeting me where I am in that moment. And so you always want the ChangeGrid to be fresh as we're looking at it. When we're doing things like this, research results, things like that, we understand we're looking at historical data. But if we are working with an individual, after we would kind of do, I don't know, or even, again, you can work with yourself, you can work with peers, you can work with a professional, you can do lots of things if you really want to become rather masterful about this whole ChangeGrid sort of thing. But after you have a nice conversation and put together some action plans and spend some time working on implementing those plans, we would say to you, fill out the ChangeGrid again. Use the exact same activity list if you want to, but fill it out again. We should be able to see how things have changed. Has there been progress? Has change worked? That's why it's ChangeWorks. This is the tools that we use to understand, to describe, to plan, and to monitor whatever those changes happen to be. Okay, I'm babbling enough. So let me slide these out of the way. What I'd like to do now is, instead of looking at individuals, and again, those of you who have volunteered to have your grids read, thank you so much. I will most definitely do that as our time goes on. But today I'd like to show you a couple of the group results, because a couple of really fascinating things are coming up there. All right, so I'm going to open up this one. So one of the activities was about eliminating the barriers. I set this up so that before I slide it in, I can actually make sure it's private. Yeah. No, oh, by the way, let me tell you now, if you guys have your ChangeGrids handy, you can look at them to figure out, this happens to be activity number 9, I do believe. Give me just a jiffy. Eliminating the barriers. Oh, good grief. Eliminating the barriers, number 9. Yeah, activity number 9. If you look at your ChangeWorks results and you see where your number 9 is plotting, then look at this diagram and see if you can find the same location. And instead, you're going to see an alpha character. That alpha character represents you as an individual, and it will stay that letter for this whole grid set. So I don't know who individual C is, but individual C plotted activity 9 at 10 and 9. That's why that C is right there. That's where their number 9 would be if you're individual C. So bottom line, can you guys figure out which letter is you? Or you understand the letter represents one of you? And you could do it on your own if you don't have your grid handy. All right, so each of these again, these are how I think there were 8 of you at the time I ran this report. These are how the 8 of you have answered the question, eliminating barriers to living more authentically. Now, to again reacquaint you with what you're looking at, the triangle that you see here gives me an indication about what the average rating is. So on average, if I took all of you, averaged you all out, on average, you guys are saying your ability to eliminate barriers to living more effectively is about an 8. And the challenge is a little bit above a 7, call it 7.5, 7 1/3, whatever, it's right around there. So that's where you're at as far as ability and challenge go. You did all consider it to be important. That's why the fill of the triangle is red, because red is a reflection of the importance. Whatever's going on inside of the shape is the reflection of importance. And then the color of the shape itself, whether it's a circle or a triangle or the diamond, is telling me how big of a task you think it is. So overall, you guys said, hey, it's a moderately sized task. It's very important. My ability is an 8. That's nothing to be embarrassed by, but I got room to improve. And challenge-wise, I mean, it can't be ignored, but it's hardly a big test. You know, I mean, it's a 7 for my ability, or rather for the challenge that's presented to it. That's the average. Now, let me just tell you real quickly what the problem is with the average. The average doesn't represent anybody. Well, it's very close to E. Whoever E is, that's real close for you. But you know, G, the description I just gave doesn't describe individual G. So when we're looking at these group profiles, we use these when we're trying to work with a larger population, where we're trying to say, you know, when I look at this activity, and as a human development professional, I say, I'd like to write an article about eliminating barriers to living more authentically. So what do I need to say that's going to help the average reader of this? And so this tells me what I'm going to do. Or if I'm, you know, a big corporation, I'm trying to figure out, do I need to do a training program? Do we need to have some sort of a coaching initiative? Well, the answer to what shape it might take is given by these statistical analyses of the data that we collect on a whole group. So again, the best information is the information from you understanding what you are saying to you about you, or doing it with a peer, doing it with a professional, whatever you want. So, okay, now let's take a look at this. I've got somebody who thinks their ability is only a 5. I've got 3 people who gave themselves a 7, 1 gave themselves an 8, and 3 gave themselves a 10. So for me to say the level of perceived ability in this population ranges from a low of 5 to a high of 10, this tells me that I'm really not working with total beginners. I'm working with people who have already developed some knowledge, some skill, some experience when it comes to eliminating barriers that are preventing them from living their life, whether they thought about it being more authentically or, closer to the way they really want it to be. The operative verb here is eliminating barriers. And so I got some people here who are going like, well, it comes to eliminating barriers. I'm not a newbie, but I'm still finding my way. And these people are saying like, well, I can do it pretty well, but maybe I can get better at it. I'm still growing. I'm a 7 or an 8. And you got a few people here, they're going like, no, I can do this. I can do this very, very well. So now the diamond represents the ideal location for this particular activity. Now, I can show you, I'm going to create a background image real quick here and slide it into play for you guys. This is the energy layer. Just give me a second. I need to mask what I'm showing. You can all chat amongst yourselves right now. We're looking for eliminating barriers. I want to see the entire set, and I only want to see the energy layers. Good. Let me take a snapshot of this real quick. Slide it in. Bear with me. This is a book. By the way, this is coaching. If you guys have questions, don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so I'll slide it in. This particular layer of the ChangeGrid tells us what your energy is around a particular activity. So let me give you a gifted student's kind of acquaintance with what you're looking at. So again, we don't do personality typing. So as I'm talking about these labels, you may hear these labels as being somewhat similar to a variety of different personality typing models you might have stumbled across across your life. Well, fine. We use these words, but they're not describing the individual. They're only describing the energy that the individual has at that particular moment in time around that particular activity. And so let me acquaint you with how this map of energy operates. You'll see that in each one of these little 16 subquadrants, there is a word that is in all caps. So those words could be driver in the outgrid quadrant. Again, if I scale back, if you see here, we divide a big X in the middle of the ChangeGrid, and over here we got outgrid. Up here we have upgrid, over here we have ingrid, and down here we have downgrid. So the driver energy is a very outgrid energy. What does the driver energy want? Well, that's why we use the word driver, to give you a very clear understanding of what the driver energy wants. The driver energy wants to go somewhere. It wants to move something. It wants to go. It wants to accomplish. It wants to do. It's driven to achieve things. It's driven to succeed. It's driven to, cross things off their to-do list. There's just this drive to go out there and make it all happen. And yes, that is a personality type, but we don't do personality typing. We work with all of those kinds of instruments. I'm just saying, look, I don't know whether you guys are drivers or not, but I can tell you that individual C and A and H and E, and some are darn close, but those 4 individuals have more of a driver energy when it comes to what I say, identifying barriers, or was I eliminating barriers? 9, eliminating those barriers. They want to make it happen. They want to move it forward. They want to go somewhere around it. Now, where if I look upgrid, you see the main word here is expressive. The expressive energy wants to feel something. And not only does it want to feel it, it wants to express what it's feeling. And so this is where things get far more animated, far more into our limbic system, far more about our emotional state, neurotransmitters, all those good sorts of things are coming into play. And that changes a whole lot of stuff that's going on in our brain and the way that we're processing things. So this one individual, G, has more of an expressive energy around that activity than a driver energy. Now, I said when it comes to this particular activity, this is about eliminating barriers. In a minute or two, I'm going to ask you, which of these energies do you think will do the best job of eliminating barriers? Is it the driver energy? Is it the expressive energy? Let's look over here. Ingrid, that's where the amiable energy is, the primary energy, all in caps, primary energy. The amiable energy wants to care about something. So they, in particular, caring about other people, how other people are going to be impacted by whatever they do, who else needs to be involved, included. They want to keep things very light and social, but proper. The expressive loves a good party, but the amiable wants to make sure that everything is very nicely done and nicely delivered. It's all about that appearance kind of thing. So a lot of the social graces are more of an amiable thing than an expressive thing. On the other hand, if you're on the dance floor and having tequila shots and hooping and hollering, that's more of the expressive energy. And if you're calling people on the dance floor with you, most definitely. If you go and you drag them onto the dance floor with you, now that's the driver energy coming into play. So you get it, different energies impact different activities in different ways. And then the last primary energy we're going to look at is analytical. And a few of you, or one of you, is plotting in analytical, a couple on the border between driver and in analytical. So nevertheless, the analytical energy wants to know something. And I'm not saying they want to just know it up in their head. They want to know it in every fiber. You know, they want it to become part and parcel of who they are and what they know. They love having a command of whatever the subject matter happens to be, and they love expanding on that knowledge base. And they're not necessarily always out there saying to the world, look how much I know, look how smart I am, look whatever. They are really doing it for their own motivations. And I'll give you some exceptions to that in just a second. But their whole goal is to know something. Now, as we look at people's values, we can also see that values align with things. Some people's values are all about accomplishing things, doing the right thing in the right way. So they have very high value they might place on performance, production, efficiency, anything like that. Where the expressive might say, well, among my values is this idea about keeping things upbeat and engaging and exciting and motivating and having good fun and being really creative in our mindset and living in the moment and being very, taking advantage of all opportunities that might come before them. The expressive energy is all about that fear of missing out coming into play. You know, they want to do it all. They want to feel it all. They want to experience it all. And I know I keep saying they, because that's faster than saying, as far as this activity is concerned, they blah, blah, blah. So just kind of remember, we're talking about the individual as far as an activity is concerned, or a set of activities is concerned. They may very well be an expressive. They'd have to take a personality test to find out which one of those are. You might just know that's who you are at your essence. Anyway, we can work our way around that. So you get these four kinds of energies. What kind of energy do you think is going to do the best job when it comes to eliminating the barriers that interfere with them living more authentically? Who do you want to send to take care of that task? A driver energy, an expressive energy, an amiable energy, or an analytical energy? Anybody?
Driver.
A driver energy, because a task needs to be done. Right there, that verb is rather clear. Eliminating, get rid of something. So not only is it a verb, it's a verb of finite endurance or finite limitations or whatever. Okay, so the driver, but what kind of driver? Now, this is where we get into the secondary energy, and this is where it gets to be a lot more fun to look at. So when I look at one of these quadrants, I can see that there's another word that's in capital letter, but the rest is in lowercase. So that's the secondary energy, and it answers, how do you go about doing something? So if we look at just the driver quadrant, where most of you are plotting right now, you can accomplish a particular task by being a driven driver, So what's a driven driver? They're a driver. They want to make something happen. How do they go about making it happen? By making it happen, by pushing it and just doing it and doing it. Hell with whoever's impacted by it or whatever. So nothing stops a driven driver. An expressive driver also wants to move something forward. They want to do it by being upbeat and energetic and motivating. All those things you know about the expressive energy, just put it into a secondary contributing position, and you get the idea that an expressive driver likes to really schmooze things into happening. They want to move things forward. They're a driver. But how do they do it? By making people get excited and seeing the vision and getting on board and all those wonderful sorts of things. A very enthusiastic cheerleader kind of ones. Then amiable driver is someone who's still a driver. They're not as intense of a driver as you'll find in a driven driver, either the expressive or analytical, but nevertheless, they're still primarily a driver energy. They want to move things forward, though, by being supportive and cooperative and pleasant and other people oriented. They want to make sure that other people are recognized and acknowledged and included. So they like things about consensus, at least giving people an opportunity to speak their piece or whatever the case may be. So that amiable driver energy moves forward, but they want to kind of like almost love their way into moving something forward, care their way into moving something forward. And then an analytical driver is someone who's primarily a driver. They want to move something forward. But for them, the real way they do it is by having that understanding of exactly how to do it, what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they need, all that kind of stuff. So getting prepared in terms of having the right resources, having the right data or intelligence going into something, that's the analytical driver. In an influencing situation, the analytical driver wants to prove something. So they're ready with the facts, the data, the proof in order to move something forward. Where the driven driver says, well, to hell with the proof, just do it. And the expressive driver says, you know, I just really feel that we could blah, blah, blah. And the amiable driver is there just kind of going, why don't we all work together? And, you know, can you feel that there's a different energy that people can have about these, about particular activity? In the middle, by the way, right in the middle, you could just be a balanced driver and just be a little of all of these in your secondary position. So we do look very much even at tertiary energies. So these spots inside of that driven driver quadrant are not all created equal. Each one of these addressable locations is different than any addressable location adjacent to it. And so we'll get very fine-tuned with the energies. But for what we're doing here, you get the idea. Now, why would I want a driven driver energy when it comes to eliminating barriers? I want someone to get rid of these things and just get rid of them. So let's not spend a tremendous amount of time and energy into figuring it all out and really getting our mind and our heart in the right place. Just do it. When we're talking about barriers that are stopping you from living authentically, in all likelihood, these barriers are not new arrivals in your world. These barriers have existed for a good long while. When is enough enough? So you may very well, and in fact, let's look at this. According to your the group of 8 of the respondents here, half of them are right here in or on the border of amiable driver. They're trying to eliminate barriers, coming at it from a place of heart and caring. And it's interesting that that energy, do you think that energy makes you want to sever ties or draw to people closer together? Is it building a wall? Is it building a bridge? Is it simply getting it done so that it's done, being very task focused, or is it really factoring in how everyone is going to be feeling about something and knowing that that there's psychology that's going to be involved, etc. So do you believe that that energy is serving you as well as moving a bit further outgrid? How many of you, when you think about eliminating barriers to living more authentically, you've actually identified there's a barrier that is stopping you from doing that. And very often those barriers happen to be people that are in your lives or people you associate with, groups you're part of, whatever the case may be. It may very well be that they are a barrier to you being authentic. And for whatever reasons, you've made it okay. You know, humans are astounding in their ability to rationalize anything, totally unrelated things. They can somehow rationalize. Like we, yeah, they can rationalize it. So I just want to look at this and go, is that serving you well? Are you in a place, again, this is you talking to you about you. If your inner voice is saying, you know what, when it comes to eliminating those barriers, we want to be gentle about it. Maybe we don't need to eliminate the barrier. Maybe we can just negotiate the barrier. Maybe we can soften the barrier. Maybe we can do all those things working together or whatever to really handle that barrier well. Many of you who are plotting here are already of that energy. And so I would ask you, if you've already tried to renegotiate a barrier, if you've already said, I know I need to move on, I know I need to get out, but I just believe in what they're doing. I like these people. I like whatever, you know, there's so many good things, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I know it's toxic. I know.
See, I've got that exact situation with the client, and it seems like time is the primary factor for changing from amiable driver to driven driver type behavior.
Yeah, well, because think about what has to happen for me to move from amiable driver to driven driver. One or a combination of two things. I need to move my level of ability up. So maybe as I develop more insight, more understanding about whatever those barriers are, how those barriers are actually impacting you, what the actual cost is to your mental health, to your whatever your goals happen to be, whatever, you know, it's different for different activities. Again, it's activity specific. So you kind of have to just go, all right, I've done that. It's not really working. I got to be honest with myself. Well, maybe you need to learn another technique. So you now know how the consequences are. By the way, what I'm being right now is an analytical driver. I'm saying, let's look at some of the facts. So what do you need to know? What is this gap made up of, and how do I close that gap by giving you that knowledge, that skill, that experience, that resource? So we have to identify them. That's an analytical activity, and then we have to help you get them, and that might involve any of these these energies, depending on what kind of a student you are.
Sounds like a good path activity.
It could be a very good. In fact, we'd probably walk the path as one of the very first things we do around that. Where you're trying to go. Those of you who don't know what the path is, it'll appear sooner or later. See, we know that you can learn ChangeWorks just through osmosis by participating in these group readings. You can't help but absorb some of the language, some of the understanding, and so you don't necessarily need to do it. You could take the course. The course is online. It's up on YouTube, so you could go through the course if you really want to learn it, starting from square one, like a class would be teaching it. And those of you who want to be professionals, there's another layer you have to go through, so we can be confident that you can do a decent grid creation and reading. Anyway, lots of ways for you to learn more about it. So maybe, just maybe, I can do something to help these individuals increase their perceived ability to do this eliminating barriers. Maybe, just maybe though, I will wait until something happens that moves their level of tension up, their perceived level of challenge. So if I change the background image, you would see that it's the 5 levels of tension. Right here, you're in power. Well, maybe something happens and suddenly you go up to power, stress, or even stress, because whatever that barrier is, it's unlikely to go away all by itself. And that means it's going to reappear and re-express itself or be there, whenever you're trying to do something. Well, sooner or later, that's going to raise your level of productive tension. So just again, as a reminder for most of you, definitive change only occurs 2 places on the change grid. Those 2 places are outgrid or upgrid. The difference between outgrid accomplishments, outgrid changes, and upgrid changes is this. Upgrade changes are dictated, driven by outside factors. So something comes along into your reality that makes you finally do whatever the task happens to be. So whether that's eliminating a barrier, whether that's going and getting your car looked at, whatever, if you don't do something proactively, if you don't do something intentionally and deliberately, that doesn't mean it's never going to get done, but it may very well not get done until the situation outside of you imposes itself sufficiently powerfully enough that you go like, I got to do it. I got to do it right now. I could have done this long ago. Why? Ugh. And so that's it. But definitive change can most definitely occur upgrid. Unfortunately, you're making those changes now from a reactive position with a very great sense of urgency. As we move away from the center of the change grid, our logic is replaced by emotion in terms of reasoning and decision making. The further upgrade we go, the more reality is being distorted. This is not a good place for you to be making decisions that really matter. No. And that's why we say definitive change also occurs outgrid, but outgrid changes are driven by internal factors, that you've made a choice, you have an intention, you're doing something very deliberate, full knowledge, full confidence, full awareness of whatever that's going on. And so you're the one who's driving the situation forward. You're not waiting for anybody or anything. You're the one who's going ahead and doing it. Well, one of the greatest opportunities that we have in our industry is we need to go into organizations and basically say, right now, your organization is changing because of external factors. You're constantly reacting, you might say responding, but you're constantly reacting to what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in the political sphere, what's going on with competition, what's going on with you name it. If you're constantly in this defensive position, constantly responding / reacting to whatever that's going on, well, what does that really mean? It means that rather than realizing your dream, your vision, your mission, your purpose, you're instead just defaulting into wherever that chain of reactive decision-making puts you, which I would be surprised is where you were hoping to go. And so we're far more at the mercy of other people's messaging. Remember, we talked about the chorus of the mind. When I'm upgrade, I become very susceptible to the influence of others, to the manipulation of others. And I'll do something for sure, but I'm really not in the right frame of mind or in the right positioning on the change grid to do the right thing in the right way at the right time. On the other hand, if I have more of a driver energy around it and I say, look, I don't wait for things to happen and then respond to it. We want to be the leader in our field. We want to be the ones that are the trailblazers. We want to go where no one has gone before. You know, we want to do that. We want to go out there and explore and create things for purpose. And that's that driver thing. So I don't need to wait in order to catch up with my competition. I want to set the standard for what my competition has to set up to. So that's a different sort of an energy around it. And certainly when it comes to eliminating barriers to living more authentically, that driver energy is going to serve me better than any of the other three energies could possibly do. Okay, let me be quiet for a moment and ask you guys, did you find that interesting? Are there questions you have?
Yeah. So I have a question, T.
Yeah, David.
I've run into numerous situations where I have amiable drivers who try to solve a problem and fail, try again and fail. Yeah. And so usually what I do is I walk them through the path, but when I get to the very end, I say, now we've done this a number of times and it's failed. If it fails again, what do you expect from me?
Right. Yeah.
And that moves them into that driver energy.
It moves them into the driver energy. The question itself moves them upgrade because they're like, oh, he's catching me with, catching us with our pants down or whatever. But then they rise to the occasion and they go like, oh, no, we got to do it. We got to take care of it. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. By the way, upgrade changes occur when the person reaches a point where they just go, enough already. The time to do it is now. That's where that, I think I mentioned to you, the threshold of activation. I know we're talking about a lot of things, you're using a lot of terminology that many of you on the call are watching the videos may not really be familiar with. We promised you, if you just stick with listening to these coaching sessions, you will absorb so much of this through pure osmosis. And the reason why we know you'll absorb it is because this is not an invention. This is a documentation of a natural process that is already occurring inside of each and every one of you. So we didn't invent tension. We didn't invent all these different responses that are scattered around the change grid. We noticed them and we sought to find patterns in them. That's where we start talking about the Circle of Brilliance does this, this task called the merging of brilliance, where we try to find all sorts of different models from all sorts of different disciplines and say, they're all trying to describe humanity. Let's see how they fit together. Let's see how they fit together, fit together, fit together. And so that's really what it is that you're looking at when you're looking at the change grid. So I said that because when we have someone who we know is an amiable driver, and David may very well know that that's actually the individual's personality, not just how they're behaving with this particular activity, but how they behave with activities in general, or where their home base is in the whole landscape of what personality might include. So an amiable driver, the problem with an amiable driver in a leadership position is that they hesitate to be the voice instead of the facilitator for others' voices. Sooner or later, someone has to make a definitive choice. And the amiable driver energy would want to hold back making that decision pending receiving additional information, additional input, etc. Pardon me. Now, it's all coming from a totally beautiful, noble place. They want to be inclusive. They want to make sure people are heard and respect individuals. That's all very, very nice. But there's a time aspect to it that can't be ignored. It takes time to get all that information. It takes time to get input from all those people, where that driven driver energy is saying, like, we don't need to know all the information. We just need to have the right information or enough information. We don't need everybody's input. We just need to have enough input that we're, our eyes have been opened to certain things we hadn't necessarily filled in. So just kind of fleshing out, we need some of that, but I don't need to talk to everybody. I just need to talk to enough other people in order to get to that kind of statistically accurate awareness of what's really going on. All right, anyway. Point is, the energy is changing. An individual who is trying to run a company and they are an amiable driver will create a wonderful place to work for as long as it lasts. They are never going to garner the kind of respect as a business leader that someone in any of these other three energies are very likely to earn. And so if I was going to talk about executives in the executive suite or anything, the expressive driver energy is the CEO, the driven driver is the chairman, the analytical driver is the chief financial officer, and the amiable driver is the chief operations officer. And generally speaking, things like human resources falls into the domain of operations. And so it's not at all surprising to find out that the amiable driver energy is where I'm going to find the training department and the benefits administrators and whoever is helping people on board and recruit and all that sorts of things. It almost comes across as being a supportive executive role instead of a leadership executive role. Obviously, I'm not saying that they can't also be a leader there. I'm just saying that that energy is not really going to indicate good. Again, not personality, just how they happen to be responding to these particular activities. David, did that help? Oh, you're muted now. Okay. All right. Let me show you another activity so we can kind of see what's going on. So we talked about eliminating barriers. or eliminating barriers. The other one was about exiting relationships. I'm going to open this one up at the same time so you can kind of see how things move around as far as average locations. Whoops. So let me scoot this one out of the way and make it a little bit. Oh, I didn't want it to be bigger. Eliminating barriers. Someday I'll learn how my technology actually works. And then this one here is about exiting relationships. Let me zoom in a little bit on this one. This is about exiting relationships. Well, when it comes to exiting the relationship, rather than saying we want someone to be a true, this would actually be over here, this would actually be an amiable driven driver. So they got to make it all happen, but please don't forget the people are involved. So that's what we want. But when it comes to this particular activity, we're saying, no, we want you to back it off even more. Just take a little chill pill, dial it ingrid a little bit, become a little bit more amiable and a little bit less driven. We want you to kind of like be in the middle, because this particular activity of exiting relationships could take a very different energy depending on the specific relationship you need to end. So for example, last night, Linda and I were watching some TV, flipping through the channels. We don't do cable, we do streaming services. And we realized that on a couple of streaming services, we've watched everything we want to watch right now. So why are we paying for them? And so generally what we do is we cancel those and then we start up a couple more. And when new stuff returns, we'll just move it all around. We're constantly moving around. Well, I am, if you think about it, exiting a relationship. When I do that, I don't need to be an expressive driver to cancel Netflix. I need to be an analytical driver because I just need to go online and click cancel. That's all I have to do. So different relationships require different approaches to exiting. If on the other hand, I'm trying to just say, there is a relationship in my life that has been so filled with toxic negativity that I no longer wish to be exposed to it. It is now harming me. It's damaging me. I can't fix that person. I can't, they're being enabled, blah, blah, blah. I have to exit whatever's going on. Well, the energy necessary to exit a relationship that's at that stage could be very, very different. Maybe you need to be a little bit of a amiable driven driver. An amiable driven driver would be kind of like tough love. It's just saying like, I really do love you. I support you. All those things are true today and will always be true. However, there is a boundary, and the boundary has been now exceeded by too much, for far too often, for far too long. And so I need to have my distance. I need to whatever. So even though I'm a driven driver, I can still be diplomatic. I can still come from a place of love, but I need to be a little bit more about that. Maybe the relationship is one where I go, all I really need to do to have this relationship, to exit this relationship, is to leave it alone, because this person is such an expressive, they're just going to move on to their next place. So if I make myself unavailable, or if I just kind of disappear into the background a little bit, they'll move on. And next thing you know is I haven't heard or spoken to them forever and then some. So sometimes the problem can resolve itself. That's a very different strategy than doing others. We're people that are downgrid. The analytical driver energy might say, and sometimes we need to do a very carefully calculated plan. For example, going back to corporations, let's say that we need to terminate an executive. And in order to terminate this executive, we know we're going to need to have security handy. We know we're going to need to have some people help them pack up whatever their personal things are so that we get all of our stuff and blah, 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 blah. Well, that requires some thought in front of it. I have to go, what is it that we need to do? How are we going to do this? Who do I need? What documentation do I have to do? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of an ending of a relationship might very well be one that is best done from an analytical driver standpoint. So again, this is where your ability in that oracle, the self, becomes more and more important, because I would hate to think that the only message you ever give yourself is that all relationships that need to be ended get ended with a hammer by a driven driver energy. I can't believe that that's going to serve you well in every situation. And we don't ever want a relationship to end and have the person be more bothered by your behavior than by their own. So hopefully this is a growth experience for them, even though they'll probably blame you for a good reason to go, because depending on the personality type, some people find it far easier to blame than to take responsibility. Maybe you know some of those people, but that's it. All right, I'm babbling, but you get the idea when it comes to exiting the relationships. This is where we would probably want to be, but look at where the average person is plotting. They're plotting a bit further downgrid, kind of a blend between an amiable driver and an analytical driver. And they're getting close to that analytical energy. They're slipping down to the lowest part of power. Again, look at this wedge. They're in the lowest part of power, almost into power apathy. And remember, power apathy says, I know I need to do something. I just wish somebody else would do it. So why don't you send them a note? Why don't you let them know we're busy that lifetime, So that's the injury that's going to happen. So there are several of you that are plotting even further downgrid. You're the ones that are pulling this average plotting down. Now this means two things are possible, or a combination, and that is that you're either just plain really, really good at it, and if it needs to be done, you're forthright around it. It's something you don't really mind going out there and doing it. You know how to do it, and that's fine. I'm glad you rated your ability as a 10. The challenge is not all that high, 4 or 5 in the case of these two individuals. Some even gave themselves an 11 for being able to do it. Individual F, fine, gave themselves a 9. But these are all people that are saying we're very capable of doing this. But look at where they're different in terms of the colors. One person says this is low importance. Individual F says this is not all that important. That's why it's green. C is saying it's moderately important. B and E are saying it's very important. Obviously, one of the things you want to ask yourself in terms of the oracle of the self is, what is that importance? Where did that come from? How did you determine that level of importance? And is that level of importance somehow or another helping you rationalize not doing anything about it? It's small and it's only moderately important. It can wait. And by the way, I'm down in power apathy, so I've got other things that are more important, so I'll postpone doing all that. And so our counsel to the individuals that are plotting here when it comes to this particular activity is, are you just letting it move to a back burner? Are you just accepting things as they are and figure that the pain of dissolving something is so much greater than the pain of continuing as things are? Is that what's going on here? If it is, and you're okay with that, well then, yay you, because we don't cast value judgments. Wherever you are on the change grid, it could be just fine. It's not me to decide. Yeah, we kind of figure out a good area for our reasons, but you might very well say, look, I've already cleaned house, and I'm very good at preventing toxic people from entering my reality. I'm good at this. Well, then please, could you do a little workshop for us? Because a lot of us are elsewhere on the change grid. But we would want to know, that's great, but are you doing it? Are there things that need to be done, but you don't have the level of productive tension sufficiently high enough to compel you to actually do it? Now, if I look over here, I know we're right at the top of the hour. Individuals A and G and D, well, they're right where we would really want them to be on average, but I would just be going A and G, make sure you get your frame of mind right before you start the conversation. Do you really want to come at it with that driver intensity? Do you really want to come at it with whatever this expression is, what you're actually feeling? Is that really going to serve you well? Or do you just want to chill out, dial down, whatever words describe the movement, the direction of the movement? And D is real close. We just need to go raise it up a little bit. Let's take care of it. Let's take care of it. Now we also have individual H floating all the way over here. Moderately low level of ability, moderate level of challenge. And so again, this is showing where there's a gap in ability. So what individual H needs to learn? What do they need to learn? What skill do they need to have? Maybe they need to practice this. Maybe they need to think about options, etc. So again, individually, there's different ways that we would guide the person. But overall, I would say to you guys, you need to kind of ask yourself those questions. Have I cleaned house? If you have, feel free to do a happy dance. But if there's still house cleaning to be done when it comes to these sorts of relationships, you got to ask yourself, is it serving me well to be in power apathy around this? Because I got a life, I got a day I could fill with power and power stress and stress. So if I can keep myself occupied by all that stuff, then maybe I don't have to get around to this unpleasant task of changing whatever this relationship happens to be. So there's some, again, oracle of the self. You need to have a conversation with you about you when it comes to this particular activity. And so, yeah, there you go. All right, thoughts, comments about what I've shared with you as far as these two activities are concerned?
Great session.
Good, I'm glad. I mean, no one dropped off. That's always a good sign. So I hope you are finding value in all of this. And I do encourage you to reach out if you do have questions. If you've not already filled out the ChangeGrid, you can just go to our YouTube channel and it'll have the link to the profile underneath every single one of them. So you can feel free to do that. But we'll send out a reminder email, and it'll always have links to our YouTube channel as well as links to do the profile if you've not done so. We would very much appreciate it. I know some of you are starting to share the links. That's really a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for doing that. Just know that we really are still trying to iron out a few little technical bugs. And I was recently notified by the piece of software I really want to use that they have now fixed their issue and they'd like me to test to make sure that it'll work. So hopefully by next week, I'll be able to do that. Finally, for those of you who are members of the human development industry, and all y'all can consider yourself that if you want, we would encourage you to join the calls we do on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the Circle of Brilliance. What we're going to be talking about starting tomorrow is how artificial intelligence tools can be used to help us do the work that we're doing with our clients. I want to show you guys how, particularly those that are doing coaching work, etc., how the artificial intelligence actually becomes another voice of, I want to say, caring detachment. And so I'll demonstrate that for you tomorrow. Those of you who would like to participate in that, if you just want to give us, send us an email at tnapier@masterstream.com or lnapier@masterstream.com. We'll be more than happy to send you the link to join us on those calls. So with that, any comments, questions before we're done?
Thanks.
Thanks, T.
Okay.
Thank you, T. That was wonderful.
All right, thanks, everybody. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.